I always thought of myself as on top of the AI game. So at my previous job, I put together presentations for leadership on how to use AI, would incorporate it into pretty much everything that I possibly could to help speed things along. And it wasn't until recently, in the last few months, when I joined CodeBuddy, that I realized I was not using AI right. I was basically just using a small portion of it and not in a way that was ultimately that effective. And Hunter, you and I recently had a conversation with one of our friends who's also a founder. He's an investor and advisor in our company. He gave us some really good feedback on the CodeBuddy product because he went through the how to request a feature portion and it asks you all these clarifying questions. And he's like, guys, I wish developers would use AI in this way. And it got me thinking too, why am I not using AI in that capacity? Why am I telling it what to do rather than asking it, what does it need from me? So I'd love to, in this podcast, discuss different ways that you have found AI to be more effective, how to utilize AI to be more effective, and what takeaways people can do to get more from using these systems.
One thing I want to say is, there's no such thing as using AI wrong per se. It's just how good of results can you get out of it, right? And you're correct in that most people are using AI in a way that, you get very much lower fidelity results or like lower quality results, or just, there's a lot more leverage that can be used with these AI systems to get better and better results out. So one of the things that I like to think of too, there's a spectrum. Whenever you as a human engage with an AI system, there's a spectrum of kind of what you are looking for out of your AI, or what kind of engagement are you looking to have. And you can essentially break it down, the way that I do it at least, is break it down into 3 categories. So there's subordinate, there's partnership, and there's mentor. And basically how I think of it is, so if you think of the subordinate, meaning I'm engaging with an AI that I would like to act as a subordinate to me. And not in like a power dynamic, like weird, I'm your boss sort of way, but just like a way that you would ask an intern in your company to do something. So when I do that, I know very well what I want from that AI. I know how to describe it well. I know how to teach it exactly kind of what I want it to do in certain situations. And generally, I'm using this pattern for smaller, shorter interactions. So I'll give an example. When we use AI to generate code, one of the things that can happen is namespaces can get messed up. It's really easy for this to happen. And for those who don't know, it's at least in the .NET world, a namespace is it's a statement at the top of a code file that says, hey, I am in this portion of the code solution. It just says like namespace, .NET server, .database, or something like that. It's a very simple statement. It's very contextual to the code that you're actually writing, and it's really easy for an AI to mess it up. So, you'll see a lot of AI generated code where it'll say at the top, like namespace, your namespace, right? Because the AI is not working in your code directly. It just plugs something in there. And so a really good example of a subordinate use of an AI, and I've found actually GPT-4o Mini to be super, super capable and powerful and fast and super cheap at doing these types of tasks. So one of the things I'll say is like, hey, we had this AI generated code, but I know that there's a non-zero possibility that the namespaces are messed up. So I'm going to go to you and just say, hey, just fix up the namespaces, make sure they're correct, return me the correct results. And that's a super good super good example of engaging with an AI in a subordinate fashion. And, again, really the key characteristics are there. Like, this is something that you very well could do. Like, you have the skill sets to do, you understand all of kind of the possibilities around the problem. Like, If somebody gave me a piece of code and said fix the namespaces, I could do that all day long, twice on Sunday. But it's super nice to be able to offload that to an AI because it's a low leverage task. So that's one example of the subordinate. Then you kind of move up in the realm of what you're looking for in terms of, maybe I'm looking for a partnership sort of engagement with an AI. And this is where you kind of get into the way that most people use ChatGPT or Claude or the other conversational chat-based AIs that are commercialized and available in a web portal. And this is more of a case where I'm asking an AI to work with me on brainstorming some idea that I have or refining some piece of content or, basically I'm working on a task and I want some sort of intellectual equal kind of to help me, just be another person in my corner as I'm working on this. And this is where we get into, like you mentioned, the idea of letting the AI ask you some questions about what it thinks or what information it would want in order to be able to deliver on, what you're asking it to do. And that's something that, it's because it's kind of awkward. Not a lot of people do it because it's weird to say like, hey, can you help me do this? Mm-hmm. But first ask me questions about how you think I should do this. And so it's like,
yeah, it's like treating it like a real person.
Yeah. And it's weird, right? And I think you've started doing this, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not a natural thing to do. Like if I'm texting Tanner, like let's say I have, a piece of content that we're going to put out and I want Tanner to take another look at it and do some refinement, right? Like I would never message him that and say like, hey, can you look at this and take a look at this aspect of it? But first send me up to 3 questions that will clarify what you want or, what you think you need to know in order to do that first, right? I would never say that because Tanner's an intelligent human being. We work together. And I know that the reason I don't say it is because I know that if he has those questions, instead of just blindly going and doing the, whatever it is that I asked him to do, he's going to ask me, right? Because he has kind of that autonomy to decide, am I going to right away do what was asked of me without the information that I need? Or am I just going to say, well, why did you do this? What are you thinking about this? I have no idea what you mean when you say this. But the GPT doesn't have that, right? So a generative pre-trained transformer at its core is a big machine that takes in inputs and spits out outputs, right? And so if you ask it to do something and you don't explicitly say, ask me any clarifying questions that you need in order to do this the best, it's just going to do the best version of what it can of what you asked it to do, given the information that it has. So
yeah,
I
and
think
oftentimes that's why the results are super boilerplate and not that good, because you ask it like, hey, I want you to turn this PDF into a LinkedIn blog post or something like that, and it just feels very mediocre. Well, that's because if you would just ask anybody, a human or an AI, to just do that and they didn't ask you any questions and specifics or understand who you are or any of those things, of course you're going to get something that's just really average.
Yeah, literally mathematically average, right? Like it's going to spit out the average of all of the other LinkedIn posts that it is consumed and understood to be LinkedIn posts. So yeah, I think that's kind of one of the one of the techniques that we've adopted very early in the CodeBuddy, AI development that has been super impactful. It's just that idea of extending out an interaction and making sure to spend the time to communicate with the AI surrounding expectations and details before you actually have it try to do the thing. And so that's kind of the second level. I'm working with an AI. I want it to be a partner. I want it to work with me. I'm just asking for, an additional set of eyes on something, or I want some additional help. And it's pretty good at this, right? Depends on the task, and it depends on your ability to describe what you're looking to do. But generally speaking, you can pretty much achieve a pretty good intellectual equal partner. I mean, obviously, if you're talking about laser physics or something like that, it might not be the same thing. But within reason. And then the third category that of interaction is mentor. And this is the one that is super hit and miss in today's day and age. So like I'm looking to go to an AI and not ask for, I want you to bat this idea around with me that I have, but like I'm looking for you, the AI, to generate me an idea to solve a problem, or I'm looking for you to generate me a methodology to do something like that. Again, I say hit and miss, and there are hits, right? Depending on the subject matter and things like that, depending on what kind of training data any given AI has in its training data set. But this is the one that is the most kind of difficult to achieve, certainly in an autopilot sense. So that's the other kind of axes, I guess, that you could break down AI interactions with is, are you trying to achieve an autopilot experience or a copilot experience? So autopilot being, especially if you're writing code, I want this process to run in isolation without having to have human interaction or intervention. And I want it to just, like I said, the namespaces thing. I don't want to have to check it. I don't want to have to verify it. I just want you to fix my namespaces when I asked you to. That's an autopilot experience. Copilot, not to be confused with Microsoft's
or GitHub or
GitHub.
All the other people are
all the other
taking
copilots. Generically, the definition of a copilot experience with an AI is you have a human and an AI that are performing some sort of transactional interaction. And when you bring that into the equation, you get a lot more forgiveness in terms of kind of the AI prompts that you're using and things like that, because there's always going to be a human to direct things if they start to go off the rails. But that was a lot. But that's kind of how I think about getting useful results out of AI. Any given problem that I have that I sit down to solve, I think it's really important to consider, what am I actually looking for, and make sure that we're reaching for AI in the right cases and in the right ways. Because if we're just looking, like, you still have to be an intelligent and idea having innovator if you're going to be successful in whatever it is you're doing. You can't just ask AI to, hey, write me an algorithm that will fix this giant problem in an industry or something like that.
Yeah, when I go back and I think about, I never really used AI in an autopilot sense, mostly because my brain doesn't necessarily work like that. I'm personally not a programmer like you guys. I'm on the business operations side, and so I'm someone like, if I was going to delegate it, I'd probably just do it myself. And so I'd never touched it with that way. And then I never really did it in that mentor type fashion either. I would treat it as kind of a mediocre copilot, where I never once considered asking it, what does it need to do its job better? Mm-hmm. And so that was one of the first revelations, like I was saying before, of it knows better than I do what it needs. Mm-hmm. So why don't I ask it, and why don't I provide it for it? And then why don't I give it a lot of context? So that's the other thing that I've learned from working with you guys and on the product line is, how can we get access to like your code base? So we make sure that we're asking the right questions to then get you the right results that's all in line with what you have, rather than, again, generating something that is literally statistically average, the midpoint, which mm-hmm. really isn't bad, but it's not exceptional. So it's not worth anything.
Well, it depends what you're looking for, right? If it's a low leverage thing in your business, you might be okay with average.
But if you could deliver a much better thing every single time, it's literally going to be better.
Exactly.
And hence more valuable. And that was just a degree that I missed. And you mentioned just asking it things. So a prompt or something you can add to your prompt every single time is, ask me 3 questions that will improve the response that you're giving me. Or ask me 5 questions or 6 questions, however much you want. It's crazy how much just doing that at the end of every single prompt. Sure, it's going to take a little bit longer, but you're going to be getting responses that are much, much more applicable and much, much better. And then the other thing, like in the context, is what can I give it in the prompts, and now with the ability to add links or files or different things, that's going to be way better. So a thing that I've started doing when I take, let's say, a podcast transcript and I want to make it into find highlights and that would be appealing, I can also include a link of or a PDF of our sales packet. So we can understand who is CodeBuddy, what do we do, what do we value, what is our value prop to customers, who are we targeting, all of these things to make a response on blog posts that are actually applicable in our tone for us. That was something that I never even thought about doing before, and now it's just such an easy add. And then the final thing, like you mentioned, is the mentoring. So oftentimes I'm asking it to do something specific for me. Let's say I have a bunch of friends and they use AI for figuring out how to do better stuff in Excel all the time, because Excel's crazy powerful. And even if you're an Excel wizard, you're still using maybe like 5-10% of its capabilities. So they'll be like, oh, how can I do this formula? But a better thing is go to it's like, how can I do the whole spreadsheet better? How can I lay out this whole thing to do a more effective way? Or even on top of that, rather than just do a spreadsheet, how can I automate the spreadsheet? Or even on top of that, how can I turn this into a program so I don't even need to run the spreadsheet every single time? So it's just reframing it and thinking of it in different degrees that you can use these AI tools to make yourself way more effective and get more out of them.
Yeah, I think context is huge. And, the market is showing that the different LLM providers are putting in huge amounts of energy and effort in adding context features where you can do multimodal, you can add images, you can add videos, you can add, PDFs and things like that. So context is super, super important. And the other thing is having the correct context is super important. So there, again, there's a spectrum in this space where it's like you can ask, for example, let's say I need a coding function done. I can ask it to write me a coding function to do some specific thing that I'm trying to do and give it no other code or no other information or no other context about what I'm doing. And it will spit back a function and I might plug it in and it's like, well, I'm not even using this version of .NET. So like this isn't going to work. So that's one end of the spectrum where you like give it no context and try to get results out of it. The other end of the spectrum is theoretically, and I've done this before, you could max out the context window of an AI and pump it as much of your code repository as you can fit in a message. And then say, I'm looking to write a function in this one file that does this. And that's also kind of equally, not necessarily equally unhelpful, but it's unhelpful in a different way, which is like too much information is also not good, right? Because just like a human, we need to be able to have the right amount of information to solve a problem. And if we just throw everything at it, it's got to find a needle in the haystack. It spends a whole bunch of kind of computational or logical energy on that as opposed to solving the problem that you want.
Yeah, it really dilutes it down.
It does, yeah. And so like having the right amount of context is critical or obviously there's an optimization problem there, and it's easy to ask the question like, well, how much is enough context or what's the right amount of context? And the unhelpful answer is exactly the amount of information it needs to solve your problem and nothing more. But one of the things that I found, and for ChatGPT users even, one of the patterns that I use a lot when I'm using ChatGPT is I try to be really cognizant of like, on the left you've got like the threads, right, or whatever that you're having with a GPT. So you have different threads, different chat lines, and I try to be cognizant of keeping those threads like single purpose in terms of the goal. So it's one thing to like basically, so like let's say I sit down for a development session and I'm using ChatGPT, for sure every hour when I'm writing code. And over a 4 or 5 hour session, like, there's probably 4 or 5 things, 6 things, depends, that I'm interacting with an AI about, help me make this model, help me change this function, yada, yada. And you can do, and I've done it before where I just have a mega thread like for the day. And, I can just keep asking questions, and once it solves one problem for me, I'm like, okay, now let's move on and do something else. And it can work, but I've also found much better results in separating threads out topically. So if I'm asking about, writing a database accessor or debugging a database method that's not returning the results that I think, and then I'm going to move on to, making some CSS changes, keeping in mind that like having the right context in the chat history is super important. If what I'm working on, like if what I'm about to ask an AI doesn't have to do with the chat messages that we were just like, doesn't directly apply to the chat messages that we were just having, I'll just go over and start a new thread, because it just, it cuts down on the vector for confusion due to context.
Well, it's kind of like switch tasking, right? If you're working on something and then someone pulls you away, it takes a little while to get, you're not getting the best you because you're still part of their thing. Yeah, and then you overlap in your head and get things confused. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, just important to keep a clean mind space, for the AI. Like you wouldn't like it if someone was constantly just whiplashing you between topics.
So here's a question for you. How to get better context? Let's say that you do have a large code base that you want to analyze, to then how do you pare it down to get better, more relevant, potent information that then you can consistently have the AI then go through and utilize to give you better results? Like, what is your process looking to do that?
Yeah, I think, basically the exact specifics are going to differ from code base to code base, at least at this point in time. But basically the way that I go about breaking down an existing code base into, a consumable and interactable way for an AI to add value to developing on that code base. The most important thing is to break a code base down into the semantic subsystems that make up that code base. And when I say semantic subsystems, I mean things like, where are you accessing your database? Or to start with, what is defining your database? If you have a relational database, what are the table definitions and where are they? That's super important. That like a database is the foundation of your software application. That's a really important piece of context. Then there's, what is your application code that is actually interacting with the database? And, in a separation of concerns kind of built application that should be pretty isolated. And then you have, where are high value business logic operations occurring? Where's the software doing the meat of your calculations or orchestration of your specific business processes? That's a really important thing to know. Then you've got like your interface, right? And so if this is like a standard web app, you've got, maybe a JavaScript based web framework. That's an important piece to kind of isolate off. And then the integration between your interface and your business logic. A lot of times this is an API, and you've got like Axios calling on the JavaScript side, and it's calling some REST API points on whatever your server side is. And so kind of those are sort of like the axes of decomposition that I like to use in terms of breaking a system down in a way that now we can, when we're working with, say I want to get the AI to help me with changing a database contract and the way that we access it, right? Now we have some kind of boundaries around some pieces of context that we can give to the AI. So if I'm asking it to create me a new database table or to alter an existing database table, just pull one or two existing database table create statements or alter statements and say, as an example, this is how we currently do this. And that, it seems like a small amount. It seems like a small thing, especially if you are working with that system every day. But there's so many just small little practices and details, even going to something so like seemingly trivial as, do you use under case with underscores for spaces, like on lower snake case or something versus upper camel case. And like, it's an arbitrary decision, but it's kind of jarring, and it, at the best, it's jarring if you get results from an AI that don't look like what you would expect, and at the worst, it will actually break stuff. Like if, for example, your serializers rely on that casing or something like that. So, I think generally speaking, as far as context goes, breaking your system down into those major pieces and then pulling little bits of context from those as you're asking an AI to do specific tasks is generally what I found to be the most effective. But one other thing that I wanted to talk about as well, and this can apply to programmatic or, ChatGPT web-based use of AIs, is also the power of asking an AI to consider and plan before it executes something that you're asking it to do. So again, like I said before, it's a GPT. It's going to provide the output according to what you asked for on the input. And the same way that it won't generally spontaneously ask you for clarifying questions, it also is not generally going to spontaneously step back and come up with an overall plan before it goes into, writing a piece of content or writing a piece of code or tackling some problem. And it's another kind of tactic that I found to be really helpful, is to just say, consider it and write me a high level plan of a good way to go about tackling this problem first.
Well, it's just like you would do with a real team member. Again, at whatever tiers you're talking about, you don't want them to, you just give them the assignment and then you don't see it again until it's literally done. You still want to be involved in part of the process. And again, that's something that I never really considered previously, where I would just ask it to do very specific things, and then I would use the regenerate, rerun, or have it do it again in different ways until I got a result that I kind of liked, and then I would take it from there. But approaching it where I spend more time in the front end, giving it the right amount of information, asking it what it needs, providing it there, getting suggestions from it on the actual path where we can go, because maybe it will have more information than I have in my head on better ways to do things. And then actually having it build a game plan, signing off on it, and then executing on it is a completely different workflow than something I've ever done before.
Yeah, and even that's the thing you got to remember too. Yes, it's artificial intelligence, and yes, it has more information than, in terms of raw gigabytes, than any human has. But all of that information, it's a language model. It's all information that was trained on language that, in one way or another, for the most part, was written by humans. And so it's a bit, it's asking a bit much to say that, now this, because we fed a bunch of data into it, and now has superhuman multi-hop reasoning capabilities. And so it's a good guideline too, is if you're asking an AI to do something, how would you ask a skilled human to do that? And if you're asking it to do more than what you would ask a skilled human to do, or even a single human. So a good example of this is writing front end, let's say React components, right? It's really easy. It's tempting because of the allure of artificial intelligence and instant gratification and all those other things. It's really easy to just go to ChatGPT and say, write me a React page that, write me a React login page that also contains multi-factor authentication or single sign-on with Google, Microsoft, and GitHub or something like that. And we have in our heads an idea of what a login page with those things looks like, and we say write me a React component, and it will spit something back out, and about guaranteed it'll have a username, a password, button to click sign in, a button to click sign up, and it'll add those three providers. It will do what you asked it to do. But we also have ideas about layout and centering and stacking buttons, and are there images on the buttons, and all these things that are kind of just implicitly in our head. And that if I were to go to a skilled developer and say, build me a React component, a login component that has these three things, they're never just going to sit down and jam out some code. First, they're probably going to ask you some questions about how you want it to look. Then, if they're responsible, at least draw it out on a piece of paper, what you're trying to build, or at the most, actually wireframe it out in Figma. Figma's easy to use, and then they're going to go and develop the code. And so, kind of to ask for all of that in one fell swoop from a non-human large language model is asking a lot. And so even with something like UI, I have found a really interesting technique where you can ask it to do a design, quote unquote, for the component that you're asking it to build in text, and it will actually return you an ASCII art mock-up of the component that you just asked for. Meaning it will put asterisks or whatever, make a box. We've all seen them, like people spend a whole bunch of time figuring out how to draw a cat with just text characters. And it will basically, create you a box, and it'll show you your login component, and it'll show you the buttons. And then you're able to, before it goes and writes code, you're able to kind of back and forth with it and say like, oh, I was actually thinking this. I want it to be split left, right, and I want the MFA providers on the right or the username and password on the left versus stacking them vertically. And like, it's basically much more effective to have all of those conversations before you write code. Because as soon as it writes its first piece of code, it has now defined the anchor for what it thinks the code that you want is, and you can only move incrementally from that anchor point. Versus if you have that conversation on a piece of ASCII text before you ever say like, okay, now let's turn it into code, it's much more willing and able and nimble at changing that as opposed to, the component that you wanted to build.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. If you were to actually work with a human, let's say you hire a freelancer and you just said like, make me this layout, and you didn't refuse to talk to them until you got the result, again, you're probably going to be getting something very similar, or they'll use their best judgment. And just like we said, most of the time the AI systems are going to get whatever the average of everything is. So you're not going to get luck out and get someone who's got some unique perspective perhaps. And the other thing that I guess I didn't realize is the anchoring part. Like you said, so many times you want to just jump in and start getting some results and refine from there. But it is more important to flesh out all of the details before it sets that anchor, because then it's going to start from a completely different place. It's kind of like, again, if you were working with a human freelancer, but they couldn't really ever change their mind from what they built before.
Right.
And so you'd have to fire that freelancer and then start fresh from a complete new one. In AI, it's just, again, open another thread or tab like you talked about. But
Yep.
It's that same, comparison where you really want to feed it as much of the right information, get it in the right persona, the right perspective, ask it, do this kind of dance before it starts generating, and then build off of it. So that's a really different way than, again, most people who are just like, write me this thing or do me this thing. And I found that I would be curious to know what the average length of a prompt is, but I imagine it's probably only a sentence or so.
Yeah. Another thing, and as we get into like more kind of complex programmatic based AI development, another thing that has been out forever, but I haven't seen like super robust use cases of it. I think it's a new technology that people are still figuring out how to use, and that's agent-based AI development. So the idea of agent AI development is not only are you creating a connection to a large language model that you can send messages to and it can send messages back, but you are also defining one or more functions that agent can choose to execute based on the situation and whatnot. So an example of this is like, let's say I've got a light on my desk, a desk lamp, and I've got a power. Let's say I have a relay on, and I actually had this at one point in time, so this is not a joke, but I have a relay on my main desk power plug. So if I want to be able to shut down my desk lamp and my dock and computer and everything like that, I could create an agent and say, you're a helpful desk management agent and you have the ability, and let's say maybe I have a dimmer on my light too. So I'm going to tell you you're a desk assistant agent for me, and your job is to make me happy about the state of my desk. And I'm going to give you 3 functions. I'm going to give you turn desk lamp on or off, like a Boolean. I'm going to give you a function that says set desk lamp brightness from 0 to 100%, and then I'm going to give you a function that says turn desk computer on and off. So now you define those functions, and you can basically teach the AI what it needs to pass when it wants to call any one of those functions. And then you just say, you call them when you see fit, as you see fit, based on the information that I've given you. So now I have this, let's say I have this chat window running up in the corner of my machine. And I say, like, I get on and I say, it's super early and I drank way too many beers last night and I've got a killer hangover. Okay. The GPT, I don't know if it would do this or not, but presumably, like, if it understands that hangovers suck and bright lights are not great, it might choose at that point in time to execute, turn desk lamp on because I'm here, but set the dimming to 15% because I probably don't want a whole bunch of light, right? And so that's just one example. Or like then, I'm going to lunch. Okay, let's turn the desk lamp off. Let's turn the computer monitors off because we don't need them running. And basically that's a super simple example. And it's actually a variant of what Microsoft uses on their semantic kernel docs website. But basically the whole idea is, creating purpose-built, if you want to think of it as an intelligent being that has, this thing's purpose is just to manage the state of my desk, and that's all it has to focus on. And I will give it these tools that it can have in its toolbox. It's an incredibly powerful kind of pattern that has tons and tons and tons of applications in business practices, in entertainment, in nearly every industry.
So if someone was wanting to get more familiar with agents, where do you think they should start?
Well, I mean, depends on the someone if that person is technical or not technical, right? I have not messed with a lot of the because I know there are commercial products out there for being able to, like, in a low code, no code fashion, develop agents with functions. You can also, ChatGPT or OpenAI, if you sign up with an account and go to the API portal, they do provide a playground or a sandbox. I forget what they call it, but they provide a place where you can interact with assistants there. And an assistant, you're allowed to define function definitions and basically see when it would call those things. If you're a developer, in terms of actually hooking those things up, we at CodeBuddy use semantic kernel is our AI orchestration framework. It provides basically interfaces for all of the major large language models and converting function definitions and messages and things like that into those proprietary formats. And they have some really good documentation and use cases and things like that around getting agents up and going. Because honestly, like, the technical details of defining an agent and defining the functions, like, is not the difficult part. Like, once you know the agent that you want to build and the functions that you want to give it the capability to call, it's easy to implement. The real, like, kind of art to the whole thing is translating a real world business problem that you have into a definition of a scoped agent and the functions that you would give it that will effectively solve that problem. So it's a little bit like meta programming, where it's no longer about the difficulty is not in the code that we're writing, but rather deciding on what code are we going to write.
Well, I think we covered a lot here. Can you just do a quick summary of, the three different types of AI agents, or not agents, but AI personas or tiers?
Yeah. I guess just sum up everything that I've said from an advice perspective. When you're looking at AI and trying to use it to solve problems, be really considerate about, think about, am I looking for someone to solve a problem, someone like an intern to solve a problem, and I can describe it really well, and just trust that it's going to get the results out. If that's the case, you're looking for shorter interactions. Don't try to stretch them out. Don't try to change it into mentorship or whatever. Just ask your question, describe it, get it, move on to the next thread. If you're looking for a partnership, be really verbose about what you're looking for, but also I highly recommend letting the AI either plan what it wants to do or ask clarifying questions of you in order to do its job better. Again, I understand it's an awkward thing to kind of start doing because we don't typically do that with other humans, but that's really what's going to get you the best results. And then, mentorship. It just be cognizant if you're looking for a mentor where you're looking for an AI that's smarter than you about a topic to give you advice. It's hit or miss. Sometimes you might get really, really good results. Sometimes you might get results that look good, but later on down the line, you discover that they're not. And because you're asking for an expert and not a partner, like you didn't necessarily spot that right away. So it's always good to bring in additional context as you can and check things against established, kind of sources of information. So.
Perfect. Well, yeah, just like any mentorship, if someone's giving you very important advice, you usually want to check with multiple sources just to make sure you're not getting bad advice.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, perfect. Yeah, love the discussion. Thank you to everybody who's made it to the end of the video. We're working on different ways of making retention better, but if you did, reach out to us with any tips, tricks, things that you've found to be really impactful using AI tools here over the last couple months or so, because they're constantly changing, they're constantly evolving, and they're getting more and more powerful, and it just feels like the capabilities of how you approach them change every week. So love to hear how you are using them and what you're finding effective. And with that, I guess we will see everybody next week. Bye-bye.
See you guys.